A man who never eats pork buns is never a whole man.
Sleeping Dogs is not just the current status in my living room, it's also an anomaly in gaming. It's a game that overcame some significant development hurdles, being cancelled far into its development and even changing publishing studios, but still somehow released as one of the most cohesive open world games that I've ever played. And although it sold pretty well and was received well by critics, the sales expectations it was supposed to meet on release were ridiculously high, and the game of course fell short. This led to potential sequels and spin-offs being cancelled, and ultimately turning Sleeping Dogs into a one-off masterpiece. Releasing in 2012 on the PC, the PS3, and the Xbox 360, and even though it's been 11 years since then, the game still outshines some current open world titles. Sleeping Dogs takes place in Hong Kong, and the setting absolutely steals the show here. I've never been to Hong Kong in real life, so I can't speak on the accuracy, but this city just feels alive. And I know that sounds cliche to say, but it puts even modern Night City to shame with how lived in it feels. People going about their business, carrying shopping bags, whipping out umbrellas when it starts to rain, with vendors yelling on every corner.
Hey you! You hungry, huh?
When it came to making the city itself, developers spent a week in Hong Kong, studying the environment, going to malls, clubs, pork bun vendors, and even interviewing ex-Triad members and retired Hong Kong officers that took part in the anti-Triad task force, which in turn also inspired events in the game from their crazy stories. They even spent days just capturing audio from the bustling streets around them to get an authentic ambiance in the game. This in-depth look at the city truly shines through at every moment in the game, from the most secluded shipyard to the main city streets. I'm gonna be cliche again and just say it feels alive, because it does. I typically suffer from open world fatigue in most games, especially in this era of gaming where after a while the world just kind of falls flat. Sleeping Dogs is one of the only games where I boot the game up just to run around through Night Market or cruise through the city in some nice cars. That is until I get harassed by the game telling me that superior YouTubers are also better at driving than me. The game follows an undercover police officer named Shen. Shen is originally from Hong Kong, but at the age of 10, his mom moved him and his sister to the US in order to start fresh, primarily to help Wei's sister get clean from the drugs that were prominent in their neighborhood, called Old Prosperity. Little did she know that moving to San Francisco was like hopping out of the pan and into the fire, since years later, Wei's sister dies of an overdose anyway. Wei, on the other hand, grows up to join law enforcement with the San Francisco PD and eventually gets chosen to take part in an undercover operation in Hong Kong, and is tasked with infiltrating a Triad organization called the Sun On Yi, cleverly renamed from the real Triad group called the Sun Yi On. Getting into the Triad gang is easy for Shen, as his childhood friend Jackie Ma is involved with them, and when Shen shows back up in Hong Kong, he is quick to introduce him to the leaders within the gang. Once he's in easily, he isn't necessarily very trusted at first. He starts doing jobs for an underboss named Winston, a tough guy to be sure, but the real threat turns out to be his mother later on, but we'll get to that.
What the fuck? He's crazy!
Wei starts out collecting money from street vendors and roughing up some rival triads, but quickly gets more involved in the Sun On Yi's operations. He becomes a favorite of the chairman of the group and even becomes a captain of sorts in his own right, once shit starts hitting the fan and some spots need to be filled. But all along his journey to climb within the triads and gain their respect, he is still at the end of the day an undercover police officer who is ultimately trying to take this group down. But at most points in the game, you start to forget that. The occasional meetup with your handler quickly makes you reassess how you're starting to feel about these characters that you meet along the way. The game revolves around Wei walking the tightrope between being a police officer and being a member of the Sun On Yi, and at certain points in the story, it's kind of hard to gauge where his loyalties truly lie. But before we get too deep on Wei getting too deep, let's take a step back and discuss the struggles that United Front went through when making this game.
I like exciting rides.
In 2007, Activision approached the freshly established development studio United Front Games and asked if they'd be interested in making an open world game for them. The only thing that they were working on at the time was a kart racing game for Sony, so they gladly picked up this work. This sort of exploded their studio. They only had 10 employees when Activision approached them, and in the deal they were provided funding for 180 employees. This was destined to be a massive project. They named the project Black Lotus, and their intent was to make a crime drama with dark humor and gritty undertones. But they only got a year into development before Activision decided, you know what, this cool little project that you guys are working on, it would really be dope as fuck if you made that part of our true crime series of games. You know those games that were decent and didn't really sell that well? Yeah, you guys can make a new entry into that. So, good luck. Activision officially revealed this grand idea to the public in 2009. True Crime Hong Kong is set to be released. Now, this wasn't inherently a bad thing. It generated hype for the game as True Crime definitely had its fans, and at the very least, people recognized the name. 1 year later though, in 2010, 3 years into production, Activision decided to cancel the project. They were concerned that further investments wouldn't improve the final product and decided to cut its losses instead of releasing a game with, quote, quality issues. Turns out they were just scared of the climbing budget and other titles releasing around this time like Red Dead Redemption, which they saw as far superior to their project. And it made them fearful that they wouldn't get the sales needed to turn a profit. It's also reported that the game was pretty much complete at the time of cancellation. According to the executive producer, the game was playable from beginning to end. Recognizing the game's potential, Square Enix decided to pick up publishing rights to the game, but they did not buy the True Crime IP, just this project that United Front was working on, Black Lotus if you will. So instead of True Crime Hong Kong, the game was renamed to Sleeping Dogs. And United Front Games was free to finish their project. Playing Sleeping Dogs revolves around 3 main systems: fighting, driving, and shooting. While shooting doesn't come until a little later into the game, fighting and driving are there from the jump. During development, one of the main things that the team wanted to perfect was the combat. A lot of the staff at United Front worked on the Rockstar game Bully and became pretty well versed in making hand-to-hand combat work. One of their primary inspirations for this game was the Tony Jaa movie The Protector. They wanted a combat system like that focused on multi-directional combat with options to grapple and counter attacks and use things from the environment within the combat, creating a fluid experience, or like they like to call it, one big violent sandbox. The combat was their bread and butter. They even consulted MMA legend George St. Pierre to make the fighting that much better. And I gotta say, it's some of the best fighting in gaming. It's like combining the flow of combat from the Arkham games with the gruesome environmental hazards from Manhunt 2. Wei has basic controls that he can follow that are usually a series of punches, kicks, and grappling, and various combinations of the 3. And as the game goes on, you get lots of opportunities to learn new combos, mostly by beating up random kids in a kung fu dojo to show your old sensei that you mean business.
Wing.
You also have a face meter, that little yellow bar in the bottom left, that stacks up in combat for every hit that you land, and once it's full, you get various buffs while in combat, like passive healing and increased damage, or the ability to terrify enemies by snapping a poor guy's arm or leg. Grappling is typically used to start a special attack combo, but sometimes depending on where you are, you may see some objects around you start to glow red when you grab someone. These are environmental executions. They remind me a lot of the Punisher game, and when you start to interrogate people, you grab them and you drag them over to the object and a unique interaction takes place. But instead of just asking them some questions by threatening them with some machinery, you drop their face into a table saw, or throw them into a fish tank, or drop a car engine on their body. It's always a good time, but not usually for them. And if there's nothing around, you can always just toss them off of something to take them out as well. It's honestly a lot of fun to get into. The enemy variety keeps it fresh as well. While fighting 4 or 5 random thugs is barely worth breaking a sweat, getting one of these big boys on your tail can make you think a little more carefully. And then of course you have to watch out for guys with knives, and at some points these knives have debilitating poison on them, which makes it that much harder to deal with. Luckily, you too can pick up various melee weapons as well, everything from crowbars to handbags to fish. But if you ever get tired of the constant fighting, remember that this is an open world game and you can do whatever you want, like bring a van to a fist fight. While not as frequent or as fun as the fighting, the shooting in this game is also quite a good time. It's usually saved for only certain missions in the game, as people having guns is rather rare in Sleeping Dogs, and Wei himself does not carry an inventory of guns like a GTA protagonist. In fact, even if you do have a gun on you, once you use all the ammunition, Wei just kinda tosses it to the side, as there aren't exactly any gun stores to buy more ammunition at in Hong Kong. The shooting is fairly standard with a small variety of weapons offered to you. A couple of pistols, rifles, SMGs, and shotguns. One of my favorites being Winston's Golden Desert Eagle. This thing's just cool as hell, and it sounds like it fucks on the first date. This game does have a fairly inaccurate reticle system for the weapons. I'm not really a fan of it. The pistols are the most noticeable, and it can get aggravating to miss some shots due to RNG, but it really isn't an issue at all. In the missions where guns are necessary, there's plenty of guns and ammo laying around to spray and pray all day. The shooting in the game is fairly high stakes. Wei can't really soak up the bullets like the rest of the video game protagonists. It only takes a few shots to put him down. So as you'd expect, most of the shooting in this game is cover based, and the levels where you're going to be shooting are designed as such. You can even blind fire from around cover 2, which is usually a waste of time as you can rarely hit anything, but you can do it if you want. The levels also usually have some pretty sweet environmental destruction elements as well, just channeling in those John Woo Hong Kong action flicks wherever they can, which also leads into this next element. There's a bullet time mechanic in this game. It can be triggered in a variety of ways, but the most convenient way is when you leap over cover, as there's always something waist height to jump over in this game, and it makes lining up clean shots just feel really nice. One of the other most common ways to trigger it is when you're shooting from a vehicle. Time automatically slows down to allow you to hit vital parts of the car to cause a dramatic flip. All in all, the shooting is good. It's not the star of the show, but it also isn't offensive in any way. It doesn't detract from what's there, and by all accounts, that makes it perfect to me. There's no reason it needed to be as in-depth as the fighting. The game clearly wants you to throw down more than use firearms.
Get a load of this. Jesus fucking Christ.
The same general thing can be said for the driving in the game. It isn't the most advanced or impressive thing in the game, but it's not offensive and it functions perfectly fine for what it needs to be. For casual driving around the city, the cars are responsive, and depending on the vehicle, they feel nice and weighty when you skirt around the corners. And in races, most of the sportier cars and bikes control really well. It's no need for speed, but again, it's not the focus of the game. It gets the job done. If anything, the tight streets of Hong Kong you're racing on make the race feel more adrenaline pumping than the driving itself. There are a couple special features in the driving, one being the ram mechanic that feels pretty arcadey to use if I'm being honest. You essentially can power sideswipe or ram cars to damage them and disable them, which comes in handy when racing or running from the cops. Without using a gun to shoot out the tires, it's really the only way to reliably stop a car from chasing you. There is also the option to do a high-speed takeover. Wei will literally jump from the car he's in onto another vehicle as he's driving to hijack it. You use this a lot in random encounters where you have to steal a desired car to sell it to a chop shop without damaging it, or stealing an armored truck in this way because you physically can't damage it. There's also a mission in the game where you steal a van carrying a wedding cake because you're helping out a very desperate and angry bride-to-be. What I do like is the variety of vehicles to choose from though. Tuner cars, high-end sports cars, luxury cars, smart cars, bikes, trucks, you name it. As Wei's status in the game goes up, you get nicer apartments and clothes and stuff. You also get the reputation needed to buy high-end cars from various dealers around the city. And once you unlock some of these badass cars, they just feel really good to ride around in. You just feel accomplished to have them. Like it's a whole ecosystem of nice clothes, respect from everyone, nice cars. You just really feel like a gangster.
Here you go.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Really. It's real cool to meet you. We'll see you around.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also boats in the game that are okay. They usually don't control that well and really aren't that fun to drive. It's fairly safe to say that they didn't go super in depth into developing Way's boat driving mechanics, and of the few glitches and bugs that I had while playing this game, I'd say half of them have to do with the boats on the water. Throughout the game, there are skills that you can learn that are broken down into 4 separate skill trees that all use different kinds of XP to rank up. It's not as complicated as it sounds. There's a cop skill tree that levels up from cop missions and drug busts primarily. It allows you to unlock firearm focused skills like fast disarms and better recoil control. The triad skill tree levels up only during story missions, and it's the only one that wasn't maxed out at the end of my playthrough because you aren't able to get triad XP anywhere else in the game, and if you don't do the missions well enough, you don't get the maximum XP needed. You can, however, just replay the missions and the XP provided is infinite, so it's really not a problem if you want to just replay the missions. The triad skill tree focuses on melee combat, particularly with weapons. It increases weapon durability, but also has some nice combat boosts like fast recovery after you get knocked down. The melee skill tree is perhaps the most important skill tree of them all, in my opinion. These are unique moves that you can learn at the dojo every time you return a jade statue to the teacher. Most of the statues are encountered as you progress through the game, but they are also marked on your map once you date Tiffany, so they are pretty easy to pick up. And this is where you learn all the cool moves that are a blast to use when fighting. Leg breaks, spinning heel kicks, tackles, and the final move called Dimak.
What the hell is a Dimak? Death touch.
On the left wing.
And finally, there's the face skill tree, and this one is less of a skill tree and more just like perks that are unlocked automatically when your face level ranks up. And you do that by wearing these nice clothes and doing favors around town for people. These perks are pretty passive compared to the other skill trees, like getting more bonuses from eating food or getting massages, or getting discounted prices on cars and clothing, but you can call a valet to deliver a car to you anywhere on the map, which is pretty cool, I guess. These systems are all pretty out of the way and not really a main focus of the game. The only one I really cared about at all was unlocking new fighting moves from the dojo, but it is another thing there to reward you for various tasks that you're going to be doing as you're riding around the city. Speaking of which, the city. Without going into even more detail about how cool the city of Hong Kong is, maybe we can just go over all the shit that there is to do within it. See, unlike Mafia 3, Sleeping Dogs knows that having a cool, detailed environment isn't enough if there isn't anything to do within it. You gotta give the player a reason to explore. And New Bordeaux was pretty, but it gave you no reason to go and drive around. Hong Kong has you covered. Most locations marked on the map are some sort of mission, and they are generally 3 different varieties. Main missions, which follow the story of the game, Wei dealing with the Sun On Yi and his handlers, Raymond or Pendrew. We'll go over the plot of the game in a little bit. The second variety is cop missions, which have a few different options. The main ones are investigations that you do under Inspector Jane Tang. These are multi-mission operations that are some of the best missions in the entire game. They are well written and feel like fairly realistic scenarios that you may run into. There are 4 different ones. The first one is taking down a drug dealer named Popstar. Then there's a murderous street racer who kills the people he's racing against in order to win. There's a serial killer doctor working with a rival triad gang called the 18K, and he's killing Sun On Yi members and harvesting their organs to sell for money. And finally, there's a human trafficker who owns offshore gambling dens. Some of these missions run parallel with the main story of the game as well, like Popstar getting caught makes the Sun On Yi very suspicious of Wei being a rat given the timing of things, and the serial killer mission involving some named characters from the gang being killed, or almost killed. Other than these big missions though, there are also some smaller cop objectives for Wei to tackle. Most of these were part of a DLC on the main game, but if you played the definitive edition, they're just included in the world from the jump. You got drug busts where you beat up a flock of hoodlums, hack a camera in the area of their watering hole, and then identify the drug dealer of the group to the police so they can swoop in and arrest them. And there are also jobs where Wei suits up as an officer and helps out the local police force as well, which seems incredibly risky for someone undercover in the city, but that. Either way, you can help stop a robbery, a hostage situation, or even street races in a pursuit vehicle. The third mission type that you'll find are favors. These missions are short and sweet and function as a way to gain reputation within the city and within the Sun On Yee, whether he's helping random people around the city or friends within the gang itself. These sometimes only last a couple of minutes and are usually pretty entertaining and goofy. One of the recurring characters in these favors is a member of the Sun On Yee named Calvin. This dude just calls you and asks you for a ride somewhere, easy enough, but before the ride he may sucker punch someone or straight up murder someone before asking you to help him run from the cops. Another one of my favorites is Wei attempting to help scam artists in the street. He'll stop and help someone with a broken down car or bike and then get robbed while his back is turned. These guys couldn't pick a worse target for this. A skilled fighter who has ties to the Sun On Yee, but also a fucking cop on top of that. They usually don't make it too far.
My leg is broken. Why does this always happen to me?
While these are the only objectives that I would consider missions, there is also a plethora of side activities and objectives to do as well. There's street races, betting on cockfights, mahjong poker, fight clubs, karaoke, and various collectibles that give some benefits, like shrines that boost max HP, lockboxes that have a good chunk of cash or weapons in them, and jade statues that you can use to bring to the dojo and learn new moves with. You can also go on dates with several different women, one of them played by Emma Stone randomly enough. Each girl also gives Wei the ability to track different collectibles on the map once they finish their dates. All these things are pretty shallow, sort of like the favor missions. Even the dates are simple activities and you only go on one with each girl and then you never really hear from them again. But they are entertaining and you definitely seek them out to do, as they just feel seamlessly included within the city, and sometimes you just want to take a break and explore rather than drill through all the main quests in the game. With that being said, the main story is one of the primary reasons this game is so great. The combat and the environment may steal the show, but the characters and the writing in this game just seals the deal for me personally. This is going to be pretty in-depth, so if you care about spoilers or don't care about hearing the plot of the game, then feel free to skip ahead. Just know that I will dislike you for a moment. The game opens with a drug deal gone wrong. Police raid a meetup on the docks and one of these troublemakers was Wei Shen. He tries to run and escape, but eventually he gets surrounded and thrown in the slammer. When he's in the clink, Wei meets his childhood friend Jackie Ma, who he reconnects with, and Jackie tells him all about how good stuff is going with the Sun On Yee and offers to get Wei into the operation once he gets out. Once Jackie is released, Wei is brought into questioning with police, and it's soon revealed that he isn't a petty criminal after all. He's an undercover cop, and this was all a ruse to meet Jackie in prison in order to make that connection organically, in order to infiltrate the Sun On Yee as an undercover agent. The men he's speaking with here are Thomas Pendrew, his supervisor to this whole undercover operation, and Raymond Mock, Wei's handler for information once he's undercover. The main objective is to shut down the Sun On Yee, everything from the Red Poles, or lieutenants, all the way up to the Dragonhead, or the Don of the group. But the first order of business is for Wei to contact Jackie and to meet up with his boss, Winston Chu. Winston is a Red Pole, and he's in charge of his own group under the umbrella of the Sun On Yee operation. This group is called the Water Street Gang. They deal with pretty low-level stuff like extortion and robbery, but they also own a restaurant called the Golden Koi and a nightclub called Club Bam Bam. That gives them a good amount of status and cash flow. Winston is rightfully skeptical of this random dude showing up trying to join the gang, saying he's from the same neighborhood as all of them, but no one seems to know him or even remember him. He has been gone for a long time, as he left when he was 10 after all, but there is a lot of talk of remembering Wei's sister, Mimi. Winston says he remembers that she was pretty hot, and Dog Eyes,
Oh yeah, first girl ever sucked my cock.
Dog Eyes is another Red Pole in the Sun On Yee, his gang being called the Jade Gang. The Jade Gang and the Water Street Gang are at arms with each other, fighting for control of certain markets, and Dog Eyes serves as the main antagonist for the first portion of the game. He also makes himself pretty easy to hate.
Hey, tell your sister give me a call, huh? I wouldn't mind giving her a mouthful.
The first real mission of the game involves going to the local night market and making sure that all the vendors and store owners know that Winston is the one in charge. And if Dog Eyes has guys there, you take them out and show that the Water Street gang is superior. And you also extort all the owners for protection money as well, of course. This shows the gang that you're capable and willing to help them out, but you still aren't really respected by anyone in the group besides Jackie. The next job you get to do is to take out a guy named Ming, who's a drug dealer that Winston was looking for in exchange for a cut of his sales, but turns out he refuses to pay up, because he works under Dog Eyes now. Wei finds him in the market and runs him down, but as he's putting a beating on him, Hong Kong police show up and Wei finds himself arrested yet again, and so soon after being released. As he's being interrogated by Inspector Tang, Pendrew walks in and orders his release and even bluntly tells her that Wei is an undercover officer. A bold thing to do, as dirty cops under Triad payroll are not uncommon on the force. But Pendrew trusts her, I guess. As for Ming, he eventually meets with the wrong end of Winston's 50 cal pistol, after Wei saves his own life by convincing the group that Ming is the rat when Popstar suspiciously gets arrested, one of the police missions that you do later on. The next day, Wei wakes up from some vivid dreams. You hear voices of Pendrew, Dog Eyes, and Winston all clouding his thoughts in his dreams, and this is where you start to get a sense that Wei may be in too deep already, becoming connected with these players in the game, but the dreams get even worse as the game goes on and he gets even deeper within the Triad. The next couple of missions all revolve around petty racket rivalry between Winston and Dog Eyes, but they serve as a way for Wei to climb the ranks and earn some respect within the crew. He and Jackie steal a shipment of stolen watches that Dog Eyes has coming in. They are cheap knockoffs, but at least it's money out of Dog Eyes' pocket and into Winston's. He takes over a minibus route in the city that Dog Eyes has control over, because I guess the Triads also control public transportation in the city too. These actions cause Dog Eyes to, of course, retaliate, and he does it in a big way, by extorting the manager of Club Bam Bam to now work for him, one of Winston's biggest moneymakers. So Wei goes to the club by himself and single-handedly takes out a dozen or so of Dog Eyes' boys, and proves to the club owner that Winston is the best muscle in town. After Wei gains some respect in the Sun On Yi, Raymond, his handler, reaches out and tells him that he needs to start gathering some real evidence and make some progress on this operation. Since he now knows where Winston and the company like to gather and discuss all their juicy criminal details, the Golden Koi Kitchen, Wei decides to bug the place and find a solid case for them. One day, Wei gets a call from a girl at the club who has a gun from one of the guys in Dog Eyes' crew, named Charlie Peng. She doesn't know what to do with it, so she asks Wei to get rid of it. People don't really know much about guns in Hong Kong. They aren't nearly as popular as they are in the US. They're fairly illegal, actually. I can buy a pistol in the US right next to my overpriced medication that isn't covered by insurance. Hong Kong's got it backwards, honestly. Anyway, Wei sees this as an opportunity to turn the gun into the PD for ballistics checks, and when he calls to meet up with Raymond to give him the gun, he instead meets with Pendrew. Very abnormal, but he wanted to deal with this personally.
I'm sure you've noticed that guns are something of a rarity in Hong Kong, not like in the States.
There is also a dead guy here in a car that was a victim of a random shootout in the area that may or may not have involved Charlie Peng. But after Pendrew uses the gun to put a few rounds into the dead guy, they can easily frame it as though Charlie was there and he was the shooter. This opens Wei's eyes to Pendrew being a dirty cop in his investigation. Meanwhile, things are escalating quickly between Dog Eyes and Winston. Dog Eyes apparently shot up Winston's mother's restaurant, killing a few guys in the Water Street gang and wounding a couple customers as well. Winston's mom wasn't hurt, but she was in the building. This rightfully pisses Winston the fuck off, and in retaliation, he orders his crew to head to Dog Eye's sweatshop on the waterfront to burn that bitch to the ground. That is Dog Eye's biggest moneymaker, and this is a serious attack. Wei understands the implications of this as well. At the end of the day, Dog Eye's money is also the Sun On Yi's money, so if he burns it to the ground, money that was being kicked up the food chain is now just gone, and this will piss off the Don of the whole Triad. Wei tries to save Winston and his blind rage decision making by offering to bring in the manager of the sweatshop alive to start a new operation and to make even more money than before to kick up the ladder. That way he can burn the warehouse down and get revenge on Dog Eyes, but the Sun On Yi won't lose its revenue. This decision making makes Winston respect and trust Wei more, but Winston's right-hand man, Conroy, still thinks Wei is a rat and he wants to see Wei kill some people in this attack to prove that he isn't. And that he does. He kills a lot of people, in fact, and after blowing the warehouse up, running from the police, and kidnapping the manager of the plant, he finally earns Conroy's respect as well.
I'm sorry, I was wrong about you. You show your true colors tonight, brother.
As Wei expected, the chairman of the Sun On Yee is not really thrilled with what happened, and he calls Winston to meet him in person. Winston also decides to bring Wei, as he's earned a fair amount of respect in his eyes, and even appointing him as the next red pole of the gang if something were to happen to him. And even going as far to call Wei family, and asking him to watch out for his mother and his fiancée Peggy. Winston really thinks he's gonna die in this meeting with the chairman, and he's putting all of his trust in Wei and truly having a heart-to-heart conversation with him. So you meet up with the chairman, a charming old man named Uncle Po. Uncle Po seems to like Wei immediately. He recognizes his decision-making skills, like keeping the sweatshop manager alive instead of going scorched earth, as well as his humbleness when Wei tries to say that it was all Winston's idea to begin with. Uncle Po dismisses Wei to speak with Winston privately. Shortly after all this, Wei meets up with Raymond, and he says that this warehouse stunt was too overboard, and Raymond is considering pulling the plug on the whole operation because he's starting to question Wei's allegiance to the investigation. But once Wei tells him that he met with the chairman of the Sun On Yee, he's quick to shut his mouth because clearly Wei is making some progress. At this point, things sort of calm down a bit. Winston puts his focus onto something other than triad operations, his upcoming wedding. He tasks Wei with helping out his fiancée Peggy, getting everything set up. You know, all the usual stuff. Picking out a wedding dress, getting the cake delivered, and finding the perfect flowers.
Stop right now!
When it comes to the actual wedding, Wei gets a tux, he gets run over, and then he meets with all the people there, including Uncle Po, who starts to hit on Winston's mom. But as Wei is getting some wine out of the car before the wedding, shit soon hits the fan. Some of the wedding venue staff turned out to be gangsters, and they started shooting and beating everyone in sight, and shooting up the whole wedding party, including the bride and the groom, Winston and Peggy, who Wei gets to too late. Peggy is already dead, and Winston dies soon after. This is one of the saddest moments in the game. There is another sad moment later on, but this really hits you hard the first time you play the game because you're just starting to really like Winston and you just spent a whole freaking mission with Peggy doing fun stuff getting ready for the wedding. It just really hits home. As Wei tries to escape himself from the wedding, he comes across an injured Uncle Po and escorts him out of the venue into the hospital, essentially saving his life. The people who attacked the wedding were members of the Jade Gang, disguised as 18K triads to throw off the trail. But Wei recognized one of the members of Dog Eye's crew, Johnny Ratface. So he hunts him down and he returns him to Winston's mom for interrogation. Winston's mom turns out to be the biggest gangster in the fucking game. She's the best interrogator in the Sun On Yee by far.
She's fucking crazy!
Since Winston is dead, Wei is now a red pole in the Sun On Yee. And even though Winston appointed him personally and the Water Street Gang likes this decision, that's not necessarily how the hierarchy works within the triad. So in enters another red pole in the Sun On Yee, a guy named Big Smile Lee. He sends one of his henchmen named Ponytail into Club Bam Bam to tell Wei that all the money the gang makes now goes to Big Smile Lee from now on, since Wei isn't a real red pole and he doesn't deserve to make the money. Wei decides to show Mr. Ponytail how gangster he is.
That's an interesting proposition. But I have a counteroffer from Mr. Lee. I'd appreciate if you relay this back to him word for word. Can you do that? You tell Mr. Lee that his people stay the fuck out of our territory, and in return, we'll let him live.
And this turns into a big shootout with Big Smile Lee's gang, and Wei stops at nothing to chase down Ponytail and give him the work. He beats the crap out of him, but he still gets away.
Fuck you, Wei.
After this, he gets a call from another red pole in the Sun On Yee as well, Broken Nose Jang. She reaches out to Wei for a partnership. With Uncle Po injured and the potential spots for a new chairman in the air, she doesn't want Big Smile Lee to take the seat. Big Smile Lee's big racket is prostitution and pornography, and she sees that as tacky for one, but more importantly, not nearly as profitable as her ventures. And if Big Smile Lee takes charge of the triad, it would be a step back for the Sun On Yee. Wei agrees with her partnership as Big Smile Lee just made a terrible first impression. Back at the Golden Koi, Miss Chu got the information that she needed from Ratface Johnny. Turns out, Dog Eyes ordered the hit on Winston's wedding in retaliation for the warehouse burning. She reminisces on Dog Eyes and Winston as kids, eating in the same kitchen where she is now, being friends, and growing up seeing how money and power make people crazy. Leading to this, killing your former best friend and his bride at his wedding. She asks Wei to bring Dog Eyes to her so she can deal with him personally. After fighting his crew at the fish market, you throw him in the trunk and you bring him down to the Golden Koi, where Miss Chu force feeds him some homemade stew made from chopped up old Ratface Johnny, before taking the cleaver to Dog Eyes next, marking it as the last time that you see him alive. Miss Chu is such a gangster. Meanwhile, Uncle Po is still in the hospital and he calls a meeting with all the Red Poles to stop the violence within the Sun On Yee. He tells Wei and Big Smile Lee to cut the shit, and he officially gets Wei initiated into the Triad so he can be a true Red Pole. He also appoints his nephew Tuchin to be an interim chairman as he's still recovering from his gunshot. I find it really funny here that no one really mentions Dog Eye's absence. I'm pretty sure no one knows that Wei got him killed or that he's even dead, but no one's like, hey, where's the other Red Pole in the gang? Wei and Jackie kill a skee-ball drug dealer as their initiation task, and afterwards are officially sworn in to the Sun On Yee. This is another heartfelt moment that makes you start to question Wei's intent here. He truly is starting to like these people. He cares deeply for Jackie, Mrs. Chu, Uncle Po, and of course Winston and Peggy before they were killed. And this thought is compounded when he meets Raymond shortly after, and he tells him to shove a direct order up his ass. They want to arrest Jackie Ma and flip him as a snitch, and they think that he's a pretty easy mark, and Wei tells them to fuck off, but shortly after they arrest Jackie anyways, because at the end of the day, Pendrew calls the shots in this operation.
Pendrew, you piece of shit.
Soon after, Wei gets a call that the 18K has entered the hospital and have started shooting up the place trying to kill Uncle Po. Wei gets there and has one of the coolest shootouts in the game, and fortunately is able to hold them off and keep Uncle Po safe. Unfortunately, this isn't the last time that the 18K will attack the weakened state of the Sun On Yee. You keep doing some work within the Sun On Yee and you meet with some music industry executives and wine and dine a famous rapper from the US in order to gain some stake in cash flow from the music industry for the Triads. You also get tasked by Broken Nose Jang to get Tuchin to resign from his temporary chairman position, as he's pretty incompetent. He is also very superstitious, so Wei just breaks into his house and makes him feel like he has been haunted in order to send him into seclusion. He's also a pretty big drug addict, so doing all this made him go off the rails and relapse in drugs. This timing worked out perfectly, as soon as you leave Tuchin's house, you get the call that Uncle Po died in the hospital. With Uncle Po dead and a massive amount of evidence gathered, Pendrew reaches out to Wei and tells him that the operation is over. It's a massive success. The Sun On Yee is crippled and big players are getting arrested. However, Wei says, fuck that. This is another moment where Wei is into the Triads more than he is the police, but I actually agree with Wei here. Big Smile Lee is gonna take over and not much is gonna change for the Sun On Yee other than for the worse. The Sun On Yee gather for Uncle Po's funeral, and like at Winston's wedding, shit hits the fan. Not only do the 18K show up, but they seem to be facilitated by Pendrew, who makes an arrest on Sonny Woe, one of Big Smile Lee's partners in the porn and prostitution ring. And then he dips out of there, letting the 18K have free reign over the Sun On Yee members, leading to a shootout between the two Triads. It also leaves the Sun On Yee in a rough state. With stress at an all-time high, they don't have a chairman, Uncle Po is dead, and Tuchin is gone off the rails. Big Smile Lee insists that he takes over, and Zhang insists on a proper election. An election is decided as that's really the right thing to do, but Big Smile Lee says fuck tradition and storms out. Meanwhile, the 18K is storming the city, capitalizing on the Sun On Yee's weakness. They mistakenly try to take over Mrs. Chu's restaurant, not knowing that she's the fucking top dog. But the shootouts in the streets are getting intense and shit starts going down fast. Jackie gets kidnapped and buried alive and decides that he's quitting the Sun On Yee. He clearly isn't cut out for this life. But after Wei rescues him, he says that he'll meet him in the morning and make sure that the location for the election is safe so nothing goes wrong. But when he tries to contact him, he finds that Jackie is dead, strung up and cut open. It almost looks like this is Mrs. Chu's handiwork, to be honest. But this is another just gut-wrenching part of the game. This is totally unexpected, and Jackie's one of the first characters you meet and get to know in the game, and he's one of the people you spend the most time with as Wei. And this one just really hits hard, just as hard as Winston and Peggy. As he's horrified by his butchered friend, Wei is knocked out and brought to a building under construction where he starts to be interrogated. This guy right here, he's pretty good, cutting Wei up and smashing his foot, but you can tell he really wants to be Mrs. Chu. He's just not on her level yet. Wei, even though cut up and beaten pretty severely, escapes his captors and kills them, and he decides on going after Big Smile Lee once and for all. The guy who hired these hitmen, of course. He chases him down, and even though he was already fucked up from the assassin, he also gets shot by a freaking shotgun in his pursuit. But Wei still fights through this, fights Big Smile Lee, and throws him into a fucking ice chipper.
Fuck you!
During this fight and face-off with Big Smile Lee, it's also revealed the reason that Lee sent an assassin to kill Jackie and Wei in the first place was because Pendrew told him that Wei was an undercover cop, confirming that Pendrew is a dirty bastard from the start. And this ends the game here. There are a few cutscenes after this finale that offer some more closure. Zhang takes over the Sun On Yi, and she gives Wei information that Pendrew was actually the one who killed Uncle Po. He shows up and injects some drugs into his IV while he's in the hospital. And she seems to know that Wei is a cop as well, as she addressed this letter to him as Officer Shen. But since Wei helped her gain her power, she pardons him from the triad. Wei uses the information on Pendrew to lock him up, and not only that, but to lock him up with the same people that he's been putting in jail. And he says he's gonna tell all of them how Pendrew is responsible for Uncle Po's death. And realistically, this is pretty much a death sentence for Pendrew. I love how the whole game, Wei is in the shit in order to gather evidence and lock up a few non-players in the game. A drug dealer named Popstar, a guy in the prostitution ring. I guess he was going after Winston initially, but he died before he could be arrested. But it's not until he caught feelings for all these people that he started to kill actual big hitters within the triad. He killed Dog Eyes in revenge for Winston, and Big Smile Lee in revenge for Jackie. These were red polls, with Big Smile Lee likely to be the chairman soon, and he murdered them off the books because even though he may not believe it, he was in way too deep. But this reflects on his police work in San Francisco beforehand as well. He was in charge of busting up a drug operation, and he ended up gunning down and torturing 2 of the drug smugglers in the city in retaliation for his sister overdosing on drugs that they dealt her. I don't think Wei is a bad cop. I think he's doing what is right, but he isn't doing it on the right side of the law, and he's quick to let his emotions take over. That was an incredibly long synopsis of the story. I tried to trim it up here and there. There was actually a good amount of stuff that I omitted, like the whole Sunny Woe storyline with Ricky and Vivian, and pretty much all the girlfriends that Wei can get, but none of that was really essential to the main plot, and I didn't really want to ramble too long. With that being said, once you beat the game, there is some DLC to dive into that I wanted to discuss really quickly.
So, what are you gonna do now?
I don't know. Job's over, but I don't really have anywhere else to go. Strange to say it after all that's happened, but Hong Kong kind of feels like home.
While Square Enix did release a ton of DLC content packs in the first 6 months after the game was released, those were mostly cosmetic packs, and they added clothes, cars, guns, and sometimes activities like the cop missions and the SWAT team DLC. But none of them were real deal DLCs. However, there were 4 expansions that added a good amount of substance and story. The first one released was Nightmare in North Point, released in October of 2012 to go with the Halloween spirit. It's a story that focuses on Chinese folklore and horror stories, such as Chinese vampires called the Jiangshi. It follows the story of an angry spirit of a slain Sun On Yee member coming back to get revenge. He was apparently run over, stabbed 42 times, and then thrown into a food grinder to end up in cans of cat food. The cat food company was called Smiley Cat, and so his nickname in hell became Smiley Cat as well. He shows up in Hong Kong and kidnaps Not Ping, one of Wei's many girlfriends, and Wei spends the game hunting him down and fighting these Chinese bouncing vampires, undead people bit by them, and these boss things called Yao Guai. In order to fight these big guys, you first have to find ingredients to make a special drink to give you the power to hurt them.
If you think maybe you're going blind, see a doctor, but only after defeating Jiang Shi.
You run into a few spirits of people you encountered in the main game as well, like Vincent, the Sun On Yee member that was one of the victims of the serial killer in the city. His role was minuscule in the main game, but he's pretty charming in this DLC and serves as a companion of sorts, hopping in and out of Wei's car and just eating as many noodles as possible, as there's no noodles in hell. You also run into Dog Eyes, Rat-Faced Johnny, and Ponytail as well. They all aren't as friendly to see you as Vincent is. Once you defeat Ponytail though, he tells you how to get rid of Smiley Cat for good. Ponytail was one of the guys who actually killed Smiley Cat, and he tells Wei that Uncle Po wanted to save his pinky finger before they threw him in the grinder so that he would never really rest in hell. Well, clearly that backfired. He tells Wei where to get the finger, and after a small tussle to get to it, Wei burns the finger and banishes him back to hell. So now him and Not Ping can get back to their date, and there's a nice little callback to Michael Jackson's Thriller video at the end. They also are sure to leave a tribute of noodles to Vincent as well, so he has some noodles to eat up down there. This DLC was neat. I liked the themes of everything, the story and the characters were well done, and it was short and concise, but there really wasn't anything new added to the combat at all. In fact, the combat was less interesting because you can't just fight these vampires like you fight normal people. You have to grapple them and throw them into portals of fire or use this sword to take them out. And if there's a Yao Guai, then the Jiangshi will just keep respawning anyway, so you have to fill your face meter in order to use this special demon killing drink powers to kill the Yao Guai. It wasn't the worst, but it was fairly repetitive, even though the whole thing takes about an hour to run through. If you haven't played it, I recommend it, but it's not worth repeating if you have. The next expansion was the Zodiac Tournament. This one may be my favorite out of them all because it's just non-stop fight clubs, but at least it's the good fighting from the main game and not fighting these bouncy vampires. It actually has an improvement as well, as enemies have unique fighting styles, most of which aren't seen in the main game at all. So fighting the other competitors is actually a blast. It's also heavily inspired by 80s Hong Kong fighting films, with cool characters and title cards and even some film artifacts flickering on the screen. It's got a really cool aesthetic to it, and it wears its inspiration on its sleeve, particularly Enter the Dragon. Wei is sent to investigate an illegal fighting tournament taking place on an island somewhere called Zodiac Island. The uber wealthy come here to bet on the best fighters around because they are extremely rich and have become numb to any sort of pleasure from entertainment. These fighting bouts go to the death, and in between the fights there are booby traps and hazards at every turn. Wei fights one guy fair and square, a Muay Thai specialist, and then gets poisoned before his next fight with an MMA guy. I guess one of the rich people wanted to bet on the other fighter and turn the odds in their favor, but Wei is a beast and he wins anyway. After this, the organizer of the event, Zhang, decides that he wants the remaining fighters to fight to the death in a big brawl, and they all refuse. So instead, he starts lowering the ceiling that has massive spikes on it, and the only way to stop it is to throw bodies into these giant gears on the wall. And it just so happens that everyone but one person is needed to stop all of the gears, so they end up fighting to the death anyway. They do make an agreement though that whoever wins will kill Zhang for the rest of them. Wei of course wins and goes on to fight Zhang one-on-one. Zhang is a master of the drunken style of fighting, and it makes his attacks unpredictable, and honestly it's a pretty tough fight because you get very little notice on when to counter. But Wei still ends up victorious, and even though Zhang begs for his life, offering money for Wei to swallow his pride, it isn't enough and Wei snaps his neck. I think this is one of those instances where Wei forgets that he's a cop again. Like he was supposed to be investigating this racket and probably arresting this organizer as well as the other rich people funding this thing, but nope, he just kills this dude and then walks away. Year of the Snake is probably the largest DLC offered, and it involves Wei being reprimanded for causing too much property damage in the city, which is pretty meta of the game to do. And in turn, he is put on beat cop duty as punishment. But this doesn't last very long, as he soon finds a cult that is trying to bomb the city and bring forth the apocalypse during the New Year celebrations. He finds a suspicious vehicle with a bomb in it one night on duty, and it leads him down a rabbit hole of various bombs placed around the city by this cult. While this DLC has the most individual missions within it, the story is fairly straightforward and there isn't really much to talk about. Each mission just involves Wei doing his best to put out fires around the city, whether it's stopping riots downtown or defusing more car bombs. It's little more than busy work, and there really isn't any progression through the story with a lot of these missions. You do capture one of these cult guys at one point and get a little information with the interrogation. You really needed to call in Miss Chu for some better answers, obviously, but yeah, you essentially just do a bunch of busy work until you get a call saying where the leader of the cult is, and then you go there and you take him out, ensuring that Hong Kong has a safe and happy New Year celebration. It honestly feels like one of the cop missions within the game, the investigations that you get from Inspector Tang. I mean, she's even the one who puts you on beat cop duty in this DLC as well. The enemies in this DLC are pretty strong. They have pretty tough fighting styles with their speed and their strength, but they aren't nearly as bad as the fighters in the Zodiac Tournament. But combat is relatively on par with the main game. The only addition now is you can tase these dudes in your beat cop blues. The final proper DLC is the smallest of the bunch, and it revolves around a crazy prototype car designed by a Dr. Tang. It's essentially just a series of race-style missions where you steal the supercar and then you test out various different modifications that the Doctor adds to the vehicle, like an EMP blast and miniguns. It's not a very narrative-driven DLC. In fact, it's pretty much just a cool car with gadgets that requires a few dedicated missions to unlock each one. The car itself is pretty dope though, and once you finish the missions, you do get to keep it and use it in the game. Well, you don't necessarily get the green light to keep it. Wei just kinda takes it. But it is an especially useful car for cop chases and street races in the game. If you're gonna do this one, I suggest you do it before you beat the main game so you can actually use this car for good. The DLC is good in my opinion, not great or mind-blowing, but a pretty solid variety to the main game, all integrating really well into the main story as well, except for the Nightmare on North Point one. That one we can chalk up as a Halloween special episode. If you haven't played the DLC, I recommend checking them out. They are an hour or so each, and if you haven't played the definitive edition of Sleeping Dogs, which includes all of them anyway, then you really need to get on that. It's essential in my eyes if you are in any way interested in open world story driven games. Unfortunately for how dope this game was, it was deemed a failure by Square Enix. It had the 5th highest first week sales in all of 2012, and it sold 1.5 million copies by the end of September of that year, and that number was expected to climb to another 1.75 million in 2013. But the publishers still considered this game a failure, as it wasn't their goal for the game. Who knows what crazy high number they expected from it, but I guess 1.5 million wasn't enough. This resulted in a sequel and a spin-off of the game called Triad Wars to be scrapped. Sleeping Dogs 2 never was officially in production, but there are countless sources of documents and designs for the game. There was definitely a team conjuring up ideas for the game, just getting ready for that green light that never came from Square Enix. Triad Wars, an MMO spin-off, was officially announced as in production in 2013 and would be shown to the public in 2014, having an announcement trailer and everything, even reaching a beta testing phase in early 2015. But by December of that same year, the game was shut down because it didn't really seem like people were enjoying it. It wasn't what the fans of Sleeping Dogs wanted. It felt more like a mobile base building game than anything else. There was also a potential movie being made on the game too, announced as recently as 2017, with some actual names in the industry attached to it. Neil Moritz, producer for tons of popular titles, everything from Fast and the Furious to the TV show The Boys. Donnie Yen, one of Hong Kong's top action movie actors, was set to play Wei Shen, but not much has been heard of this project since 2018 when it was confirmed in production. Of course, the pandemic probably slowed things down or even stop them entirely, but as far as I know it hasn't been cancelled officially, so who knows, maybe we'll see Wei Shen throw Big Smile Lee through an ice chipper in the big screen one day. Either way, Sleeping Dogs needs to live on. There are 1,000 videos on YouTube about this game, and in my opinion, there should be 1,000 more. It's a fantastic game, and if you haven't played it yet, you really need to change that. But I've rambled long enough. Let me thank my patrons for holding it down. Doc Schwinn, Kid Kingpin, Not Much, Snowflake, Anonymous Starkweather, Zachary Parkerson, Ben Stevens, Crash Bandicoot 25, Gran Taquito, Ice Ham Jello, Marshall Duff, Matthew Taylor, Potty, Scribe Slendy, and Yay Man. And my YouTube members, Grizzly Wizzly, Sexy Pickles, Forge'em Nas, and Sick Kitty is Dead. As always, thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Peace.